What if the events you call your life story weren't naturally connected at all? What if they were fragments, random, messy, unpredictable, that your brain stitched together after the fact to make everything feel meaningful? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a powerful cognitive bias that silently shapes how you see your past, your identity, and your future. It's called the narrative fallacy. And once you recognize it, you may never look at your own journey the same way again. Welcome to LernXpress, where we uncover the hidden mechanics of the mind to help you think clearer, live better, and unlock your full potential. In this episode, the narrative fallacy, rewriting your past for a better future. We're challenging one of the brain's favorite habits, turning randomness into stories. You'll learn how your mind retroactively imposes order on chaotic events, why those stories feel so convincing, and how they quietly influence your confidence, decisions, and sense of possibility. We'll break down real-world examples of the narrative fallacy at work, then show you how to consciously reframe your personal history, not by denying reality, but by understanding it more accurately. By the end, you'll walk away with practical tools to reshape your self-narrative and create a more empowering present and future. So let's start at the foundation. What exactly is the narrative fallacy? The term was introduced by philosopher and risk analyst Nassim Nicholas Taleb in his influential book, The Black Swan. It describes a fundamental limitation of human thinking, our inability to look at sequences of facts without automatically inventing a story to explain them. When life delivers uncertainty, randomness, or coincidence, the brain doesn't sit comfortably with, "I don't know." Instead, it forces a clean storyline, clear causes, obvious effects, a sense of inevitability, even when none actually exist. We take chaotic, unpredictable events and compress them into tidy narratives, because coherence feels safer than ambiguity. This bias helps us function. Stories are easier to remember, easier to share, and easier to believe than raw data. But that same efficiency comes at a cost. The narrative fallacy often leads us to oversimplify complex systems, misunderstand outcomes, and make confident judgments based on incomplete information. In other words, the story feels right, even when it's wrong. And once that story settles in, it doesn't just explain the past. It quietly dictates what you believe is possible next. In the next section, we'll explore how this bias shows up in everyday life and how it subtly shapes success stories, failures, and the way you interpret your own experiences. Taleb argues that the narrative fallacy is everywhere, from history books to business case studies to the stories we tell about ourselves. And the reason is simple. Stories are easier to remember and transmit than raw data. A clean narrative spreads, nuance does not. But why does the brain do this in the first place? Psychologically, the narrative fallacy is rooted in our need for patterns. Pattern recognition evolved as a survival advantage. If certain events seemed connected, assuming a cause could save your life. In a simple environment, this worked. In a complex modern world, it often backfires. Our brains are not designed for randomness, probability, or nonlinear systems. So when faced with ambiguity, they impose meaning, even when that meaning isn't justified. Clinical psychology offers a clear illustration. Therapists frequently observe patients constructing tightly bound narratives that link unrelated events across time. A single childhood incident becomes the definitive explanation for adult struggles. A chance failure becomes proof of a lifelong flaw. These stories feel coherent and emotionally convincing, but they are often built on assumptions, not evidence. The mind prefers explanation over uncertainty. Now let's make this tangible. Consider how we talk about successful people. Take Steve Jobs. One of the most common narratives claims that being abandoned by his biological parents forged his creativity, ambition, and eventual genius. It's a powerful story. It sounds meaningful. It feels inevitable. But is it true? In reality, Jobs' success emerged from a complex mix of factors: timing, technological shifts, collaborators, failures, persistence, and a significant amount of luck. The abandonment story wasn't predictive. It was retrofitted after the outcome was known. We didn't uncover the cause. We created a narrative that made the result feel orderly. This is the narrative fallacy at work. When we know the ending, we rewrite the beginning to make it seem like it always had to turn out that way. And once you see this pattern, you start noticing it everywhere, especially in the stories you tell about your own life. In the next section, we'll explore more everyday examples and how this bias quietly shapes decisions, identity, and belief without you ever realizing it. Another classic example appears in sports upsets. When an underdog team wins, commentators immediately reach for narrative. They talk about destiny, heart, or belief. The victory becomes a moral triumph rather than a statistical outcome. What's often ignored are the less cinematic factors: injuries, weather conditions, referee decisions, or simple variance. We prefer drama to probability. The story feels better than the truth, even when it obscures it. In personal life, the narrative fallacy is far more insidious. Have you ever had a bad day and thought, "This always happens to me, I'm just unlucky"? That's your brain stitching isolated events into a single self-defeating storyline. One traffic jam, one missed email, one awkward interaction. Suddenly, they're all evidence of a permanent trait. Or consider cause and effect assumptions. You eat eggs, later feel sick, and immediately conclude eggs are the problem. Stress, sleep, hydration, or something else you ate never make it into the story. The brain selects a cause that feels neat and satisfying, not one that's necessarily accurate. This bias shows up constantly at work as well. A colleague stays late and you narrate them as dedicated. Another observer sees poor time management. Neither story is inherently true. But once a narrative forms, it shapes judgment. Even trivial events trigger this instinct. A coffee cup falls, and the brain demands an explanation. Clumsiness, carelessness, fatigue, anything but randomness. And then there are our inner monologues. These ongoing self-stories quietly define who we think we are. I'm bad at relationships. I never finish what I start. I'm just not creative. Over time, these narratives harden into identity, even when they're built on selective memory and coincidence. The danger is not the stories themselves, it's how much power we give them. False narratives distort decision-making. They push people to invest based on imagined patterns, to avoid opportunities because of misinterpreted failures, or to hold grudges rooted in assumptions rather than facts. Entire life paths can be shaped by stories that were never objectively true. But here's the empowering twist. Once you recognize the narrative fallacy, it loses its grip. Awareness creates distance, and distance creates choice. By consciously examining and rewriting the stories you tell yourself, you can transform disempowering narratives into tools for growth, not by denying reality, but by allowing complexity back into it. And that's where real agency begins. So how do you actually reframe your personal narratives? Let's break it down into practical steps, grounded in psychology and narrative therapy. Step 1. Observe the story without judgment. Start by identifying the narratives that generate emotional pain or limit your behavior. These often sound absolute. I'm a failure because of that one setback. Or, this always happens to me. Pause and separate events from interpretation. Ask yourself a critical question. Is this story built on verifiable facts, or recognize it as an assumption layered on top of them? This moment of awareness alone weakens the narrative's grip. Step 2. Actively seek disconfirming evidence. The brain naturally cherry-picks memories that reinforce an existing story. Your task is to disrupt that pattern. If you believe you're unlucky in love, deliberately recall relationships that worked, even briefly, or situations where you grew, learned, or set healthier boundaries. If you see yourself as bad at finishing things, identify projects you did complete, even if they were small. This step reintroduces complexity, which the narrative fallacy tries to erase. By expanding the dataset, you expose the story for what it is: a simplification, not a verdict. Step 3. Rewrite the narrative, deliberately. Once you've exposed the old story's weaknesses, it's time to replace it with one that serves you. This does not mean denying failure or manufacturing optimism. It means assigning accurate meaning. Shift from identity-based conclusions to growth-based interpretations. Instead of "I failed because I'm not smart enough," reframe it as "that experience forced me to develop resilience, judgment, and new skills." Narrative therapy offers a powerful metaphor here. Imagine your life as a book. What themes dominate the chapters so far? Adaptation, persistence, curiosity? Where were the plot twists that redirected you rather than defined you? When you consciously choose the framing, you regain authorship. Step 4. Anchor the new story with behavior. A narrative only becomes real when it is reinforced through action. Begin living in alignment with the story you've rewritten, even in small ways. If your new narrative is "I'm someone who learns and adapts," take actions that reflect it. Try unfamiliar challenges, seek feedback, build competence incrementally. Belief follows behavior, not the other way around. Do not wait to feel confident. Act in ways that generate confidence. At the same time, remain skeptical of seductive but biased sources, such as selective memoirs or motivational folklore. Prioritize evidence, outcomes, and lived results over inspirational storytelling. Additional practices to strengthen the shift. Use journaling to surface recurring narratives and identify where they oversimplify reality. Treat emotions as signals, not conclusions. Data points to analyze, not destinies to obey. As Taleb advises, favor experimentation over explanation. Test your new narrative in real-world conditions and let results, not stories, validate it. When you replace rigid storytelling with adaptive meaning-making, you stop living inside a distortion and start operating with clarity. In conclusion, the narrative fallacy is not a weakness to eliminate, but a cognitive tendency to master. When left unchecked, it quietly distorts our memories, decisions, and sense of identity. But once understood, it becomes a powerful tool. By recognizing how the mind retroactively reshapes the past, we reclaim the ability to reinterpret it with accuracy, nuance, and intention. Your life is not a fixed script written by isolated events. It is an evolving draft, and drafts can be edited. When you challenge inherited stories, question simplistic explanations, and replace limiting narratives with evidence-based meaning, you unlock greater agency over who you are and who you become. So ask yourself, What story have you been telling, and does it still serve you? Share a narrative you've reframed in the comments below. If this episode expanded your thinking, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more insights into the hidden mechanics of the mind. Thanks for watching LernXpress. Now go rewrite your story intentionally.